What's up, guys? I wanted to apologize for the video so far. I didn't realize you couldn't hear me like when I'm doing the videoing in the garage. So finally got a little mic, so hopefully you can hear me better once I posted a couple other videos. I'm like, you can't hear me at all, really. It's really hard to hear. So sorry about that. I'm still rookie, trying to go amateur on YouTube here, do a little bit better. And I'm trying to get the ratio for YouTube. Like I said, it's a learning curve for me. Okay, so far made some good progress with the car. I have the new wiring harnesses ran. I made 3 new harnesses. One was for the pods, the daytime running lights, wider amber. I have my air fuel ratio plug ready to go. I redid the connectors on the harness going to the center console and integrated a fuel level gauge. So I got power, ground, signal, and then there's also a little transmitter that goes with that guy. I replaced the harness that goes up to the dash because the oil pressure gauge was up there. I don't know if you remember that. So I removed the oil pressure gauge and moved it down to the center console here. And then got a new boost gauge. This one's electronic. So it has like a transducer that mounts near the engine, and then it's just a wiring harness that goes from the engine up to here. And then there used to be my ignition on switch and my push button start switch. I took those out, and now I have a fuel level gauge here, so I can actually see it and not just have to look at my sight tube there. Ended up running another harness back. I have my wiring harness for that fuel gauge. So I just have to mount the actual sensor to the bottom of the tank. So here I have, these are all my outputs, so all my loads, all my lighting, stuff like that, all my run lights. And then I got the boost gauge wiring done, the pods, all that. This is all the old 12-volt supply. And then I have that was the other harness, was for the switch pros. I got the switch pros in. I just did some aluminum angle, 4-inch or I think 3.5-inch angle plate, and got that bolted in, and have the switch pros mounted, because you're not supposed to lay it down flat because moisture could get into these plugs and it will void the warranty. So you got to make sure that you mount it this way, not with the plugs up. Otherwise it voids the warranty if something happens. And then here's the harness I have to integrate in, and then the 35 amp harness to integrate in. I have I think I already showed you, but I do have the new fuse box in. I do have this disconnect. I have that in, everything ready to go. I found out that this pressure switch that's in the brake line that would turn your brake lights on whenever you hit the brake, it was not working. I decided to go a different route. I got the wiring marked, and then what I'm going to do is up by the brake pedal, I'm going to get another bracket, and I'm going to have they call it proximity switch, or Hall effect switch. So it's just like a little sensor, like a magnetic sensor. It'll mount here, so whenever I barely push on the brake, it'll line up and it'll turn my brake lights on. So this is the wiring harness prepped for that guy. So now I'm going to get the center console back in, get all the headset wiring up through there, get my harness there, connect my main harness there. And then I can put the dash back in. Once I get, and then here's the the new disconnect tube for the center console. That's not as clean as I wanted it to be. So there's this power module and the receiver for the fuel level gauge. So it's just FM 102. So you just give it power ground, and then it receives a signal from a 0 to 5 volts DC signal from the actual level module that mounts to the tank. So it receives it, and then it sends it as an ohm, a resistance, to the actual fuel gauge here. So it converts it from DC voltage to resistance, ohms. So got a new harness, new Deutsch connector for there. There's my air fuel ratio that will plug to the other one. So I can finally get this guy back in. For the actual dash, like I said earlier, I ended up moving the oil pressure gauge that was right here. So a little trick I did is, so kind of hard to see on the camera, I'm sure, but there's these 6 mounting screws, and they're only like maybe 1/4 of an inch. So super short. I ended up getting this kit here. They're just button head if you wanted. I mean, you can do any style you want, but I like the Allen style button head. This looks nicer, I think. So it has anywhere from 1/4 inch length, and it has 6, 8, and 1032 threads. These are 632 threads. I already checked that. So all different lengths, anywhere from 1/4 to, I believe, 1.5 inch. Washers, nuts. This kit was super cheap, like $15 I think for everything. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but anyway, the little trick I did was I took parchment paper, because it's obviously can see through it, and I put it on here, and then I marked where these 6 holes are on the parchment paper and taped it to there. And so now I just have to drill my holes. I'll probably just do 4, because this one's kind of close to the edge of that old gauge hole. So I'll probably just do 4 here. Drill those out, and then I can get the actual touchpad mounted here. Like that. And then the dash can go back in. I did want to trim this guy some, because whenever that console is in there and you have to take it out by itself, it does this to the gauge. It gets stuck, and it tears up the face of the gauge. So I want to do something about that, so I can take the console out without having to pull the dash, if I ever need to get back in there. But like I said, I mean, I simplified it down to 1 harness. There used to be 3 in there. So now I'm just down to simplified to 1 harness and 1 harness there. And then 2 harnesses that go up to the dash. 1 for the radio intercom, the other one for my dash lights, my tack, water temperature, and voltage. So simplified it up. And that is the next step. So I'll do some more footage after I get all that in, at least the center console in. I might wait to do the dash. Okay, we have another update. New starter is in. Everything wired up. Got the tail lights mocked up for testing. I think I already told you, but fuse box is done there. And center console's in. New gauges. And then there's a Switch Pros panel. Next to steering wheel. And then because the pressure switch here for the brakes because that wasn't working. So I call it a Hall effect, something I already talked about. Hall effect or proximity sensor. So that's this guy right here. Added this bracket, mounted the sensor here, ran the wiring with the Deutsch connector there. So then how this works is when press on the brake, it will, right there, it will see, close that switch, that proximity switch here. And then I'm going to add a relay back here. This one here. I'm going to add this relay in just for my brake lights. But what I did for now is I have my test light here. And I'll show you. So I have a ground hooked up to that switch. I have my power going to that switch right here. And then I have my ground going to that switch. And then the blue wire here is from that switch. So if I turn power on here, like that. So now I should have power to everything. Then I come over here, and I don't know if you can see the test light from there, but when I push on the brake, turn the ignition on first. So right now I have it wired off the ignition. So when I push on the brake, light comes on. So you move the brake. I don't know if you can see it from there. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. And now you can see the test light come on, off. Ignition off. I did get it started, so it does run now. But I might add, move that switch or that power for the brake lights. I might move that just to the battery side. So what the Switch Pros needs is a 12 volt signal here off this wire, and you can either have like a separate ignition switch, or I could just use the main disconnect there. I haven't decided on what I want to do yet. But what I did is I mocked all the wiring up. So here's your 35 amp circuits here. So I have all those connected. And then the other ones here, these are all wires that I'm not using. But like I said, everything's mocked up. So what I was saying about that separate ignition switch, the only reason I would want to contemplate putting its own separate switch besides just doing it off the main battery disconnect is because you can set up in the Switch Pros app, which I'll show you how to go through and program everything, or a run through of how to program. What you can do is you can have your disconnect on for your battery, but it won't turn your Switch Pros on, but because you can program your outputs, so your loads, you can either have them set up for ignition or you can have them set up for battery, to where if you want your ignition off, you can still turn your loads on, so without the ignition being on. And so it just runs straight off the battery, or you can program to where it will only run off the ignition. So that's the only reason why I'm contemplating doing one or the other. But anyway, when you're doing this, you have to be super organized. This is not for the faint of heart. So this was something I did, is I drew out the original schematic and then added some more notes for like all the wiring harnesses that I made. This was kind of like a rundown of my loads and how my gauges were wired originally. And then this is the switch pros. So I wrote down the pin number, the color of the wire, which output it is, the wire size, and how many amps. And I wrote all those down, and then I decided to, here's all the loads here, here's all my harnesses, my new harnesses that I made. And so here's my switch panel. So that is the switch panel up there. So what's cool about this is you can custom make this. Like, I picked what I want to put on each switch, and I mean, I might move this over, whatever, but I just wrote down my loads, and then I picked which switch I want it to go to. Okay, so there's my notes there. So then what I did was I took those loads, here's all my outputs here, and then I assigned a load to each output. That way I can go in and make it easier to program in the app and make it easier to know, because you have to tie the output to a switch number. You'll see what I'm talking about. But here is what the actual app looks like. So you actually can go through and you can name these switches. You can put emblems on there, like how you have your panel set up, because I have to still add all the stickers. So like all these guys, I have to add to the switch panel. So what you can do is you can, like how these have a physical sticker, you can also put these on to the app here. And then you can go to the settings, and then you can go through and configure switches. And so here's that battery ignition that I'm talking about. So switch 1 through switch 12, you can do ignition or battery. So like if I wanted my, say switch number 6 I have for my whip flag, maybe I want my whip flag on while I'm just sitting there. So I can go and change this from ignition to battery so that it will always have power off the battery. My ignition doesn't have to be on for me to use that switch. So that's an example. So what I would recommend doing is, after you write out all your loads, you assign an output. So the wire on the actual harness there, once you assign it, I would recommend coming into the app and going here and naming all your switches before doing anything else. So get it laid out and then program those in. It makes it a lot easier when you're going through and program this. But then also you have like on off momentary. So on off momentary. So because I'm doing my switch number 2 is my start. So that one you just want to push, and then when you release, that switch opens back up. You don't want it to be on or off. I have everything else set to on and off, but the only one that I have for momentary, where I just want it only getting powered or closed for however long I press on it, would be like my starter. So that's what I'm going to do first, is go through and name all my switches. But I'll show you. So you saw the ignition worked. So right now I kind of preset it, but so like switch 3, my dome lights. Switch 4, I have as my light bar. Switch 6, I have as my radio and intercom. So then switch 8 is my headlights and my running lights. So you can see all the lights on the gauges come on when I turn switch number 8 on. And then Also, the taillights come on. So when I turn my headlights off, my taillights go off for just my running light. I have my whip light, and I think that's it. And there's also the power for the GPS. So I just turn that switch on, but then I still have to come here and push the power there. That, and then the GPS turns on. So you can either do it from the app, or I can go through and turn everything off at the panel itself. Like that. So dome lights on, dome lights off. Just push of a switch. So I just kind of temporarily programmed everything in. I'm going to go through and redo it how I want it to be. But that'd be the only reason why you want a separate dedicated ignition switch, is if you want to have your loads ran off the battery only, and then have certain loads only get able to be powered when your ignition switch is on. But that's why I went through, just wire nutted everything together. It's a huge mess right now. And that was just to test everything, make sure I had everything wired in correctly. Like I said, I did a quick program through the app, and
One
then
eternity
tried everything
later.
out. Okay guys, the electrical is done, except for some minor stuff. Just got to do the OBD2, fix that up. Has those little connectors in there. But otherwise, she's done. Except for, oh, sorry. One more thing, I got to put the fuel level sensor on the bottom of the tank. But just little minor stuff. I'd say, all the big stuff's done. Center console's in. Already showed you the Switch Pros panels in. And so I have my main battery disconnect here. So the main battery cable comes up here to here. Then they have another one running back to the starter. And the other one comes back to the fuse box and ECU here. So I wanted to leave as much of that stuff integrated for the engine control, since they have it already programmed and tuned. I didn't want to mess with much of that, so that's really the only relays, except one over there I'll show you. I'll just have to, this is all the intercom wiring, just have to clean this up here, and this will be all done. But I have the proximity switch, the Hall effect sensor. I have that all done. The harness for it, Deutsch connectors, ran all the way back. Headlights are done. I ended up having to cancel the light bar because it was still on back order after 2 months. So I'm getting a different one. I've looked into them, and I'm going to go with I'm going to go with Diode Dynamics. I really like their light bars after looking into it. I was either those or Baja Design. So I've decided with Diode Dynamics. And it's a cool name too. I don't know. Some cool features. I'll show you guys once I get that light bar and get that installed. Nothing really over here. Like I said, just got to clean that up. Let's see, what else? Okay, so here is the Switch Pros installed. So I got this aluminum angle. I think it's a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch, and just bolted that down to the stock tray that all the relays were on. So then this is your touch panel communication. This is your main harness to all your loads or outputs, whatever you want to call them.
and those are usually up to 15 amps, except for there's one you can double and make it a 30 amp. And then these are all your big dog outputs. These are up to 35 amps. So on here I have like my ignition, which runs all the ignition stuff. I have my starter and my light bar. So any resistive load, you know, you want to run off a bigger one. This is your, so when I turn the battery disconnect on, this sends power to the switch pros, powers it up, obviously. It's fused here. And so I did end up putting a separate ignition. So that's what this blue wire outside of here is. I can turn the batteries, main disconnect battery switch on, and that will only power up very few things, including the switch pros. Then everything will be controlled. Then I have a separate ignition switch. So when I turn that on, it sends the 12 volts to this blue wire here, letting the switch pros know that ignition is on. So you can now start using the control panel. And then I'll show you within the programming, you can either have your loads, loads or outputs, whatever you want to call them. You can either have them set up for battery. So meaning when I turn the battery switch on, I can use those loads. Like let's say you want your headlights on, you know, if you're sitting at the dunes or wherever and you want your headlights on, but you don't want to have the ignition switch on, you can run that just off your battery. Or like maybe your whip lights, you know, or I have those daytime running lights. I want to put those off battery. That way I can sit at the hill and have at least some light on, you know, and I don't have to have my ignition on ready for the car ready to go. And like I said, I'll show you how to program that within the Switch Pros. So then the only relay I have now is this guy, and that is for my brake lights. I could have ran it through that proximity switch, but instead I decided to run the 12 volt power in to the relay and out, and tied into the original harness that goes out to the brake lights. And then that proximity sensor, when I press the brake, it will just energize the coil of the relay. So take it from normally open, close it, and that will turn my lights on. That will turn my brake lights on. So here's all the old harness, everything heat shrunk, zip tied back. This was all the power that went to everything else, like those switches, those older toggle switches. So I just left that there. Here's some extra, I believe I have 2 outputs left, so I could add a couple more things later. But otherwise, everything else is used. I ended up doing like 3 different harnesses. I have one that kind of goes up in the middle where that red heat shrink is. The other one comes here where this harness is. And then the third one is this spare one there. And that's about it. All the grounds are tied in. And then, so of course, it already showed you that. That's all done. I temporarily put the wing back on. So then here's with the brake lights. I got those integrated in. And then I added the Deutsch connectors, one on each side. So when I want to take the wing, I know I got to get this taken off completely. So if I want to take the wing off, all I have to do is undo this connector. This side stays connected inside the frame. This side will go with the wing. So I just do on both of those, and then I can lift the whole wing off the car. And then you just have the wiring inside. My plan with this guy is to clean it and do like a kind of like a bed liner coating inside of here. So there's all the wiring. There's to the license plate holder. There's one to that brake light. Comes out here down to the connector. I already showed you the new starter. I started the car a couple weeks ago. It does run now. And that is it. Now,
all we have left is just programming the switch pros. That's it. It's like I said, this isn't just for anyone. It can be pretty complicated, but if you have some basic controls, electrical background, it's not too bad. But I was going to show you too, when I turn the headlights on and then use the brake. So I'm going to set the camera up outside so you guys can watch from the back. Okay, battery power is on. So then here is the brakes. So every time I press on the brake switch, that energizes that relay back there. Put your brakes on, and then I believe this one is running lights. Turn the ignition on. Now I can use the switch pros. So there's running lights. And I have to tie those in with the pods, the two front headlights. But now have running lights on, and then when I need to brake, and there the brake lights too. There we go. Okay, now we'll do programming.